White men telling not rich white people that their enemies are black and brown. It starts in the colonies of what would become the United States. Let's remember, during the colonial period, mid-1600s, there was no such thing as white people. I know some people who are now called white find that shocking, right? Because they think whiteness is real, right? But whiteness was created. Europeans didn't call themselves white. We didn't call ourselves white. We weren't all members of one big happy family. Are you kidding? Have you studied the history of Europe? The history of Europe was about killing each other. That's what we did in Europe. We just killed each other before we figured out there were other people to kill. We just killed each other, right? I mean, that was the history of Europe. The English hated the Irish, right? Northern Italians didn't even think that Southern Italians were Italians. The Germans hated everybody, and everybody hated their ass right back, right? There was no team called white, no race called white, but all of a sudden, in the middle of the 1600s, there was. Why? Why was it suddenly necessary to create this thing called the white race? Well, because rich people can count. That's why. And so rich folks looked around, the ones that owned all the land, you know, in the colonies, the colonial elite looked around and they realized something, that they were heavily outnumbered by African enslaved folks, by European indentured servants who were just one level above a slave, or other Europeans who weren't technically indentured servants, but they were still peasants, didn't have any money, didn't have any land, and they could do the math. They added it up.
Peace, family. What's going on, y'all? Tapping in, man. Listen, this is a random live, but I was sitting here thinking just now on some information that I want to share with y'all. Peace and love, man. Listen, share it. Share this piece. I know it's just some midday. Salute, bro. What's going on with you, bro? Salute. Just on some midday Monday information, man. For those who are going to watch this a little bit later, be sure to share it, tap in. If you have not subscribed, please subscribe to my channel. My channel is growing steady, man. Like, I could do better, but it's growing steady though. So the title that I gave this today was Africans in America. Africans in America. Because a lot of us hear the term African Americans, right? So today I want to learn you all about Africans in America, like who these African Americans are. And this is for educational purposes only. So I don't want anybody to get offended at listening to this. It's just my perspective. African Americans. Hold on, I'm trying to get my little banner set up. Give me a second, family. My little banner going right here. There we go. African Americans. So I was just doing some research one day, man, and realized that there is an African existence in America that we should definitely acknowledge. There is. Nate P, what's going on, big dog? Peace and love. Peace and love. Everybody tapping in, man. Tap in the chat. Hey, look, man, be sure to share this so everybody know I'm on right now. You know what I'm saying? We had 13 people watch. I want to get the numbers up a little bit before we really dive in on the subject. And be sure to watch this later and take some notes if you can't take notes right now. Pen and paper gang in the building. Pencil and pad gang in the building. Let's take some notes. Rob, what's going on? What up, though? Peace and light. Peace and love. Listen, we're dealing with Africans in America. Africans in America. And I'm going to tell you guys what had got me on this journey of understanding that there was an African presence in America. And being that there was a an African presence in America, we have to deal with the Africans who were born in America at the time of the colonies. I'm just gonna give you a quick peep at some stuff you may not have known. And the descendants of these Africans in America are people that we acknowledge today as the honorees of Black history. So we're going to talk about Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman. We're going to talk about these people who are held in high regards in Black history, which is AKA African and Americans history. We could talk about how Africans who were brought over here to the Americas, North America in particular, how they were not citizens. Now, the other dark-skinned folks who were calling to be, quote unquote, indigenous American Indians, these folks were reclassified to reservations. So I'm not going to do too deep into that part of it, but I am going to show you guys the African presence in the America. I want to start with the slave ship called White Lion. You know, these ships have names. If we ever want to get curious and take a look at these ships, they do have names. So this is the White Lion. This is the White Lion. Let's learn the story about the White Lion, and then we're going to learn the backstory on how the White Lion acquisition. All right. It says the White Lion was an English privateer ship. If you're taking notes, write down privateer. Privateers, buccaneers, pirates. All right. The White Lion was an English privateer ship. So now we know it's a privateer ship. It was a work for hire. It was a contractual situation. These private contractors. See, the first contractor, we're talking about transporting goods, maritime operation, privateers. See, this says, let's write down our dates real quick. This says 1619. This is when the White Lion came to Hampton, Virginia, Fort Monroe in Hampton, Virginia. Keep that in mind. Fort Monroe in Hampton, Virginia. Those of you from 757 are familiar with the Hampton Roads area, which is Virginia Beach, Norfolk, Hampton, Portsmouth, Suffolk, Virginia Beach, Chesapeake, etc., etc. Fort Monroe in Hampton is a very historical place for a couple of different reasons. Hampton University is right across the way in the same bay as Fort Monroe. Well, not the same bay, but right in the same area. You could walk from Fort Monroe to Hampton University, which Hampton University is another situation that should be recognized at this time period as well. Let's take a look real quick, as a matter of fact, because we're at 1619. For those of you just tapping in, if I can catch you up real quick, we're talking about Africans in America. Africans in America, aka known as African Americans. We're talking about Africans in America, for those who just tapping in. And we're talking about the White Lion, which was an English privateer ship that arrived in Virginia in 1619, bringing 20 to 30 enslaved Africans to what is now known as Fort Monroe in Hampton, Virginia. These individuals were among the first to be brought to the British North America and were subsequently traded in exchange for supplies. The ship's arrival, along with that of an other ship, the Treasure, is a pivotal moment in history of slavery in the American colonies. Listen to what they say at the end. This is a pivotal moment in history of slavery in the American colonies. Do you know why this moment was so pivotal? Because these were now going to be African Americans. These individuals in 1619 would later become what we know today as African Americans. How so? I'm going to show you. I think they just celebrated this too, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Origin of captives. The enslaved Africans were captured from a Portuguese slave ship, San Juan Batista, by the White Lion and the Treasurer in the Atlantic Ocean. See, this is what these privateer ships would do. This is why the association of pirates and they would fight amongst the seas, and you only would hear about the pirates in the Caribbean. You never heard about the pirates in the North Atlantic, no pirates in the Caribbean. And in fact, this jacking took place not in the Caribbean, but what's called the Gulf of Mexico today, which is considered the same area. We're gonna talk about the jacking. They hijacked these 20 to 30 Africans off this ship that was headed somewhere else. We're gonna talk about this Portuguese slave ship. So we got 1619, right? We're going to write down Portuguese. This is important because the Portuguese are going to come up again. Remember the Portuguese. They're going to write down Portuguese if you're taking notes. This is a Portuguese slave ship. It was named San Juan Batista. So we're going to look up the San Juan Batista, and I'm going to give you some backdrop on who were the boat owners of those Portuguese ships. Let's see. Let's highlight here. Portuguese slave ship. And we're going to come back to this, okay? We're going to come back to this. I promise you. Let's go here. Let's read about the Portuguese slave ship San Juan Batista. The Portuguese slave ship San Juan Batista, known for its 1619 voyage, we're still in the same time frame, family. We're still in the same time frame, 1619. We're talking about the Portuguese slave ship San Juan Batista, which is the ship that was hijacked by the White Lion. The White Lion was another privateer ship that jacked this ship. I'm going to go with all this information to tie it back in to my point of some people that you've heard of and people you know in what's called Black history or African in American history. This is their history. Now, I told you guys to write down Portuguese, right? This says the Portuguese slave ship San Juan Batista is known for its 1619 voyage, which its cargo wasn't supplies, because they traded these 30 individuals in Virginia for supplies. So the cargo were the people, those enslaved Africans, and those enslaved Africans that they hijacked off of this ship, San Juan Batista, was headed for Mexico. It was in the Gulf of Mexico. It was headed towards Mexico in the 1600s because the Portuguese and the Spaniards were in this area. Okay. It says, during which the cargo of kidnapped Angolans, write down the word Angolans. They from Angola. These are Angolans. Write down the word Angolan, please. So now we know that in 1619, 20 to 30 Angolans were stolen by English privateers, which they took the group captive to Virginia. Now, see, this event marked the beginning of slavery in the mainland of the English America. 1619 marked the beginning of slavery in mainland English America. Slavery been popping in the islands now. You see that Mexico right there? Watch this. In 1619 voyage to Mexico and Virginia. The origins of the enslaved. In 1619, the San Juan Batista was embarked from the Portuguese port of Luanda in West Central Africa. Luanda, write down the word Luanda. Luanda's going to come back up again. So now we understand that the transportees came from a place called Luanda, which is the west coast of Africa. Its human cargo consisted of 350 enslaved Angolans. Pay attention. 350 slaves. Write the number down, please, family. Angolans. So 350 slave Angolans, primarily from the Indingo Kingdom. Write down the word Indingo Kingdom. These Cambudi speaking people had been captured in warfare by Portuguese invaders and their allies. We're going to talk about the allies of the Portuguese who was aligned with the Portuguese. Now, the Indingo Kingdom, that's N-D-O, Indongo, Kingdom. I'm getting excited because I know who was there. So the San Juan Batista is now traveling with about 350 enslaved Angolans, primarily from the Indingo Kingdom. This is, wow, man. This is the beginning of African American history. This is the beginning of African American history. Please pay attention, family. This is very important. Don't miss this. As I'm about to explain the origins of Africans in American history, disassociate yourself from this narrative. Okay? This is not your story. Like, I'm not going to explain your story. Don't think that this is the transatlantic slave trade that impacted you today in 2025 in North America. This is not that one. The second Middle Passage, I'm going to talk about that in a minute also, which is the domestic slave trade, which relocated a lot of people. That probably has more to do with your history than this story I'm about to tell about the Africans who came to America history, right? This is not the same history. This is not your history necessarily, okay? This is just a part of history that happened when a group of Africans. Now, I can take you back before 1619. This is just what the British were doing. I can show you what the Spaniards and the Portuguese were doing also in 1562. They brought Africans over here in 1562. Matter of fact, let's pull it up. We'll come right back to that in a second. Let's go here. You guys can't see what I'm doing. I'm opening another screen so we can search real quick. Give me 1 second. Switch my screen over. And we're gonna research this together, okay? Let's do it together. 15, I think it's 1562. 1562 Spanish. Yeah. Colony in Georgia. I think it's 1562. I could be off a little bit. Yeah, it is. 1526. I apologize. 1526. San Miguel de Guadalupe. This Spaniard right here, Lucas Vasquez. This is 1562. So write down 1562. So now that we know that 1619 wasn't necessarily the first time a group of Africans were brought over to the colonies under the auspice of slavery. Now we know this 1619 is not true anymore. That's why I say, like, don't necessarily relate the transatlantic slave trade history just to be your history. There's several histories, several historical moments that were happening all at the same time or around the same 50 to 100 years that would almost mirror a diaspora that you would think that your people went through, but this is not the one. This ain't the one. This is a part of it. This is part of the takeover of all the melanated people on the planet. This is a part of the conquest. So, because the conquerors were the same people everywhere they went, there was similar stories shared about how conquerors came in on a piece of land and manipulated and murdered and killed and slaughtered the indigenous population and kind of took over, just took over. So that's everywhere on the planet, though. So because that's the case, everybody's story starts with this. Let's pay attention. 1526 location, the colony was likely the mainland of what's now known as McIntosh County, Georgia, near Cepello Sound. The outcome, the settlement was named San Miguel de Guadalupe and was abandoned after about 6 weeks. So we have an established colony in Georgia that were established by the Spaniards. Okay. Hold on. What is sister saying in the comments? I'm sorry, y'all. They try real hard to connect them Africans, but there's no real proof they spoke English and were Christians. Well, yeah. I can agree with that. So the outcome of the settlement in 1562 in Georgia, the settlement was named San Miguel de Guadalupe and was abandoned after about 6 weeks due to difficult circumstances, including the sinking of their food supply ship in an uprising by the enslaved Africans on an expedition. So this is the first documented slave uprising. These enslaved Africans. So these are only Africans we're talking about right now. In 1562, they were brought over here. Prior to 1619, that's a different story. Okay. What led to Spanish expedition in Georgia 1540? This guy right here, Hernando de Soto, important guy to write down. Expedition entered Georgia in 1540. So de Soto was already in the state of Georgia in 1540. Why is it important? Because that's prior to the 1700 settlement by James Oglethorpe. That's about 200 years after this, almost. Okay. Hernando de Soto expedition entered in Georgia in 1540, driven by the search for gold and other riches. Following de Soto's success, experience the conquest of Peru, granted permission by King of Spain, de Soto led a large army in the southeastern U.S. with the dual goal of finding wealth and establishing Spanish authority, though his expedition ultimately resulted in much suffering for the local Native American population. De Soto gained wealth and experience under Francisco Pizarro. Conquest of Peru was eager to find more gold in North America. The King of Spain had granted De Soto rights to explore and govern the territory, which was common goal for conquistadors during that period of time. Some accounts suggest that the expedition also sought passage to the Pacific coast or China. After landing in Florida in 1539 and wintering near present-day Tallahassee, the De Soto army moved north, entering Georgia in March of 1540. There you have it. there you have it. We know that the colonies were not necessarily established in 1619. This was the British colonies in 1619. Spain had already a foothold on the shores of North America, and they had already brought Africans into that territory already. Okay. Let's click here and see if we can give us an account about how many Africans that they brought with them. Slave uprising. This says where most colonies lasted just 2 months before it overwhelmed by disease or hunger, a slave uprising and a hostile Native American population of 600 would be settlers who set out about 150 to leave. The enslaved Africans brought by settlers became the first documented black slaves. They called them Africans and black enslaved. Good gracious. The enslaved Africans brought by the settlers became the first documented black slaves in what would become the continental United States and carried out the first slave rebellion. So your first slave rebellion was not Nat Turner. Okay. It was around 1526. It was in the state of Georgia by a rebellious group of enslaved Africans. But again, this is African Americans' history. See, these are Africans in America. See, these Africans right here, they're in the state of Georgia in 1526. They're already here. So I'm going to go back to the 1619 narrative that's going to tell you that this is the beginning of slavery in North America. No, this is England's. This is Europe's version of it in 1619. See, Spain, the Portuguese, the Dutch, they had already had a jump start since 1495. They're about 200 years ahead of Europe when it came to transporting bodies across the shores. Because, see, remember I told you to write down a couple things about the Angolans. So the Angolans, the Portuguese, we got 1619 written down, right? We're also going to go back to what's called the Indongo Kingdom. Remember, the Indongo Kingdom was supplying the Portuguese ship, the San Juan Batista, that was hijacked by the White Lion. So what I'm saying is, by the time the White Lion hijacked the San Juan Batista and stole those 20 to 30 enslaved Africans and brought them to Virginia in 1619, and then they became the first Africans in America. No, there were Africans in America brought over here already in 1526 that were marked the first slave uprising by Africans. The Indian slaves had been uprising the whole time. It's called the 100-Year Indian War, when they first met King Philip. This is the Africans rebelling back against the colonial powers. This is the first slave rebellion in 1526. One of the first Spanish colonies in the North American continent was Georgia. What was later state of Georgia, later by James Oglethorpe. Later. All right. I think it tells us how many came. Let's see real quick. This says Lucas Vasquez Diallo was a wealthy sugar planter on Hispaniola and magistrate of the colony Royal Appeal Courts of Real Audiencia. I forgot what this right here means. Real Audiencia, or simply Audiencia, was a appellate court in Spain. It was its empire. The name institution literally translates as royal audience. The additional designation was applied to appellate courts in early modern Spain. Okay, that's what it is. It said in 1521, talking about Lucas Vasquez Diallo, Dialli, Lucas Vasquez de Leon. In 1521, he dispatched Francisco Gordillo on an expedition to the Bahamas to kidnap people as slaves. I wonder who was in the Bahamas in 1520. I wonder what people were down there. Finding the island completely depopulated, Gordillo and other slaving, so they went to the island and the island was gone. Not the island was gone, the people were gone. Word had got out. Gordillo and other slaving ships plotted for Pedro de Quiles sailed northwest in search of that previous slaving expedition he had found in that direction. On June 24th, 1521, they made landfall in Wyndham Bay. Wyndham Bay is on the coast of present-day South Carolina. After some preliminary explorations of the region, they kidnapped 70 Indians. And brought them back to Hispaniola. The authorities in Hispaniola criticized this capture, but did not send them back because of the expenses. No penalty were imposed on the captors. The captives scavenged dead animals in the town. Most died, and others were then divided amongst the inhabitants. When they returned in Hispaniola, Gordillo and whatever nigga name brought back a glowing report that land they had found. They said it would require military conquest because there was a lot of Native Americans, a lot of indigenous African, a lot of indigenous, whatever you want to call them, already there. Once settled the area, they would become rich and prosperous colony. Leon was apparently inspired by these reports and soon wrote to the Spanish crown requesting permission to explore and settle the region. Later that same year, he traveled to Spain on business for that position, but also used the opportunity to personally press the case for new land. Leon took with him one of the captured Indians who recently been baptized as Francisco de Charo and later served as a translator for the Spanish. Chacro was a Spanish name for Francisco homeland. This is the people, the Shekara, or indigenous people of southeastern woodland. They were thought to be Siouan people closely allied to nearby tribes. Waccamaw people were the indigenous people of southeastern woodland who lived in villages along the Waccamaw and PD rivers in North and South Carolina in the 18th century. People are already there. However, in 1523, Leon obtained a royal patent from Charles V and the Council of Indies, allowing him to establish a settlement on the eastern seaboard and conducted trade with the local natives. He would later be governor for life, and the title Algucia, I'm fucking it up, that's not what they say, mayor or high sheriff, would be held by him and his heirs forever in perpetuity. It don't say perpetuity, but that's what that means, though. Charles V gave Leon the title over the area of South Carolina, making him and his heirs forever. How long is forever? Even to this day in 2025, the heirs of Leon from 1523 are still the high sheriffs over the territory of South Carolina. In return for this numerous and other privilege, Leon was required to perform a more detailed exploration of the region, establish missionaries, churches, and Francisco monasteries to further conversion of the native population. And he was restrained from implementing any, what's this word means right here? Oh, any kind of labor systems. He couldn't do any kind of labor systems with them, slavery, and other means of forcing Indian labor. So now what I'm showing you is the fact that Spain, this is in southeast region of America, by the way, Spain had already enslaved the local indigenous population by 1525, as well as bringing other individuals who were Africans to this territory as well. So we have Africans from Africa in this territory of Southeast North America in this colony. You see Georgetown and South Carolina right here. This is the area right here we're talking about in 1526. Now let's go back to 1619. Sorry, I'm kind of a tangent, but let me go back to 1619. 1619 White Lion. All right, let's go back to this. 1619. Now we're going to go to 1619. We're leaving 1526. This is almost 100 years later. Almost shy of a few years. It says the fact that the White Lion landed on Port Comfort, Virginia, which is Hampton, Virginia, or Fort Monroe, with 20 to 30 enslaved Africans who had been captured from the Spanish slave ship. Now, that Spanish slave ship, they call it, was a Portuguese slave ship. We know that, right? It was a Portuguese slave ship. So they're calling the Spaniards and the Portuguese the same at this point. This marked the beginning of African slavery in the mainland English colonies, with the Africans traded for supplies by the colonists. The arrival of 20 and odd Africans on the White Lion in the treasure a few days later, it is a significant event in history, symbolizing the start of a system of chattel slavery that would profoundly shape the African American experience. This is what this shit says right here. You guys see that? You guys see this shit? They're saying in 1619, the fact that those 20 or 30 or so Africans came to the shores of North America and Virginia, let me read what it says verbatim. This symbolizing the start of a system of chattel slavery that would profoundly shape the African American experience. That's what that shit says. The White Lion and the treasure were two privateer ships. Now let's learn about privateers real quick. Give me 1 second, fam. Let me clear my board right quick. I gotta get a mouse, man, so I can work a little quicker. I'm using my keyboard, so you guys gotta forgive me. All right, yeah, let's look this up real quick. Francis Drake was the first contract privateer. See? It says not the first, but he was significant, highly rewarded English privateer and admiral who operated under Queen Elizabeth I. Well, let's ask the question then, because now I'm slightly offended. Who was the first one then? You see how fucking Google be playing with you? It's saying this. You guys saw this. It says this: there is no single recorded first contract privateer, as privateering evolved over time across the different nations. But Sir Francis fucking Drake is an early famous example of a licensed privateer who received commission from Queen Elizabeth I in 1572 to attack Spanish settlements. You know why they were attacking the Spanish settlements? Because in 1526, Spain was settling North America. They had the whole entire southeast region, all the way from Mexico, New Mexico, Louisiana, Texas, Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina. Spain had all that. This is why in 1572, Queen Elizabeth I ordered Sir Francis Drake to attack Spanish settlements and ships in the Americas. Privateers were essentially pirates with a government-issued license to raid enemy vessels, and they began operating for England as early as the 16th fucking century. So they're playing war games upon the high seas with African slaves. And it weren't just African slaves, by the way. In 1572, they had other indentured servants on there too. They needed labor. So they would just jack the Spanish settlements. Now, Spain is already getting the tail whooped by the indigenous population in North America. Spain is already getting tackled on that front. Now they have to deal with people like Sir Francis Drake, who is a privateer, which is a pirate hired by the government. A privateer was a private individual or ship authorized by a government to engage in maritime warfare during wartime by issuing a commission or letter of marque to the government that issued the license. The privateer was a legitimate asset. However, the opposing government considered them pirates. That's the same thing today. Sir Francis Drake received commission from Queen Elizabeth I in 1572, making him one of the most famous early privateers. William Kidd was another renowned privateer who began his career working for British during the 9-Year War, but was later tempted into outright piracy. John Paul Jones is another one. John Paul Jones was a famous privateer of the American Revolution, known as the father of the American Navy. Sank the bones of Davy Jones. It's a Navy song. So early England had Sir Francis Drake, Sir Francis Walter Raleigh, North Carolina, Walter Raleigh, began to operate in the 16th century, 1500s century, to challenge the Spanish dominance in the Americas. So that's what a privateer is. That's a privateer. So Francis Drake is one of the privateers. So I think this becomes important when you're having a conversation with people about the transatlantic slave trade. And I'm attempting to give you guys some more tools in your kit to have an intelligent conversation, whether you're at the barbershop, whether you're on TikTok, whether you online or just at home talking with friends and family. You will be able to have a wider range discussion about the idea that people think happened during slavery. And if you can stay in context with what we're talking about right now, as far as a timeline, and if you can show them like, hey, well, actually this was actually going on. And I applaud people like Dane Calloway when he first came out, proving that there were no slave ships, proving that the Atlantic slave trade did not happen the way you thought it happened. And not that what he was talking about made it true for me, but it made me take a closer look at what was happening in that area. So when he mentioned something about, this is Dane Calloway, by the way, when he mentioned something about the ocean gyres in that particular territory of the Caribbean islands, I could care less about ocean gyres. But what I looked at was, well, who were the people there though? I was more concerned about who been there, who the hell was already there. And that's when I discovered the indigenous population of those areas, the Caribs, Arawaks, a little bit over to the west, talk about the Taino, and others who were there. But then I got a chance to look at how Spain and Portugal were settling Central and South America at such a high rate. And I learned about King Montezuma. And learned about King Montezuma, I learned about the next indigenous king in what we call today Alabama, Alibaba, but King Tuscaloosa. So I'm learning like, what the hell? Like, this is crazy. So that's what I'm talking about. I want you guys to be able to have an intelligent conversation with people, and you don't have to get emotional. Just be rational and just explain to them, well, this also was happening that we're covering. And we can point to timelines and we can see what was happening on that timeline. That's why times are so important. When you're having a conversation, you always want to put people in time and space, family. Always put them in time and space, when it happened and where it happened. I promise you the conversation is guided by the universe once you align it with time and space. Guarantee you. Let's go back to the White Line real quick and we'll move on. The White Line was a privateer ship. It captured enslaved Africans that were headed to Mexico on board the San Juan Batista. Now, this San Juan Batista, even though they call it a Spanish ship, it's a Portuguese ship. The Spanish ship, San Juan Batista, I can now redirect you back to showing you how the Nino brothers, who were Spaniards, Moors, Negritos, how they were the merchant owners of, and their fathers too, their father before them, they were the owners of these ships that brought over Christopher Columbus. Tying back into the idea that there were some blackamoors or some dark-skinned folks transporting or spearheading the beginning of the destruction of the North, Central, and South American Empire. The White Line arrived late August 1619 at Port Comfort, present-day Hampton, Virginia, with 20 to 30 captured Africans, followed by the treasurer with another group. They don't say who the other group was on the treasure. That's funny. These Africans were traded for supplies. Although the practice of slavery was not fully legalized at this time, the landing of these Africans is considered to be the pivotal movement marking the beginning of a race-based bondage in English mainland colonies and ultimately defining African American experience. I want you to pay attention to something real quick. There were let's move on. I don't want to sidebar. The significance became the symbol of slavery. The event has become the symbolic start to the historical of slavery in the United States, and we know that is a lie. Now we know that 1526 enslaved Africans were brought here too, though, so to North America. It's just the fact that the English, British powers to be, they're telling us this story because this is in English. This is not in this is in English language. So we're going to tell a story like we did it. You know, we started slavery in America, right? This is what the English telling us right now. But had we not just understood that in 1526, though, but they was doing the same thing. Spanish, who actually owned the southeast region of North America at that time. Anyway, it is a commemorative site at this point. I want to circle back to a couple things real quick before we move on. The White Line was, it says it was a 160-ton English privateer ship operated under the Dutch letter of marque, which brought the first Africans to English colony of Virginia in August 1619, a calendar year before the arrival of the Mayflower in New England. So this is 1 year before the Mayflower was over here. It says, though the African captives were sold into indentured servitude, not slavery. So these were not the first African slaves. These were the first African indentured servants. The event regarded the start of African slavery in the colonies, in the colonial history of the United States. The first enslaved Africans in current boundaries of the United States landed in 1526, it says. The first enslaved Africans in the current boundaries of the United States landed in 15. Now they're telling you what I told you earlier. But wait a minute. I just saw something that you guys it's going to freak you out. This is called the White Line. Watch this now. I'm going to show you something that's going to freak you out there. Watch this. Hold on. But wait, there's more. What's the name of that movie? Geez, man. Just had a brain fart. What movie? Hold on. Did he say? I'm gonna kick myself in the butt because I forgot the name of this freaking movie, man. Okay, here we go. I got it, family. Hold on, because I'm gonna finish reading that real quick. And I want to show you something. Because remember, I was telling you about the Portuguese Portuguese and the Spaniards and the Nino brothers, who were really Moors, who brought Christopher Columbus over here. Let's read this. Please pay attention. Watch this. I want you guys to see what I'm seeing. Right. This says the White Lion was a 160-ton English privateer ship operating under the Dutch letter of marquis, because we understand to be a privateer, you have to have the marquis from the queen or king. Right. We learned that earlier about Francis Drake, which brought the first Africans to the English colony of Virginia. So this is not saying they brought the first Africans to the America. This is the first time they brought them to Virginia. We got that noted, right? In 1619. Let's read on. Hold on. What you want to say? Yeah. Okay, yeah, we good. It says the first enslaved Africans in the current boundaries of the United States landed in 1526. We know that already, right? In the expedition of the Spanish explorer Lucas Vasquez de Leon on the South Carolina, Georgia coast, escaped, and they are thought to have joined the Native Americans. If they survive if they survive in 1527, Estevão, an enslaved Moor, participated in Spanish expedition. Enslaved Africans were also a part of the Spanish expedition to Florida in 1539 with Hernando de Soto in 1565. Enslaved Africans were also a part of the Spanish expedition. Enslaved Africans were also a part of the enslaved expedition. Now, watch this. How they play with they play with right in your face, and you don't pay attention to it at all. You got to dodge the hijack. Here they call them enslaved Africans. Up here they call them enslaved Moor. The reason they're playing between the word Moor and Africans because Moors are from Northeast Africa. The Moors were the ones who went into Portugal and Spain. The Moors were the ones who were excommunicated and ran off from Spain and Portugal. Remember that? So this gentleman right here, Estevanco, the Moor, write his name down, was the first African and Arab person to explore North America. He was one of the last 4 survivors of the expedition, along with some other guy. But this was De Soto's expedition. He was helping De Soto navigate. He also was able to speak to the Native Americans. This guy right here. You guys see that? Write his name down. He's an important Moor that was helping out the Spaniards. The next time somebody mentions Hernando de Soto, I want you to bring his name up. Okay? The Africans on the White Line were probably among the thousands who had been captured in the 1618 and 1619 by slave raiding force, primarily consisting of African raiders. African raiders were enslaving their own people under the normal Portuguese leadership, who were at war with the kingdom of Ndongo. These particular enslaved Africans were taken on the Portuguese slave ship San Juan Batista from Luanda, Angola, capital of the Portuguese settlement in Angola. So now we're back to Angola. Are you guys keeping up with me? Now we're back to Angola. So let's talk about some Angolans in North America. Now that we know that these people were brought here to North America on the USS White Lion, and they were probably from the Ndongo Kingdom, probably, that's what they're saying, or Angola. 16. Who else was here in the early colonies who became a famous or infamous, shall I say, infamous individual. Y'all remember Anthony Johnson? In the chat right now, I want you guys to press 111 in the chat if you ever heard of Anthony Johnson. Press 111 in the chat if you've ever heard of Anthony Johnson. This says Anthony Johnson was a man from Angola who achieved wealth in the early 17th century of the colony of where? Virginia. Held as an indentured servant in 1621. What happened in 1619? Some Africans who were from Angola were brought to Fort Comfort, Virginia 2 years prior to Anthony Johnson, who was from Angola, who was brought from, wait a minute. Because we just read that those 20 to 30 individuals brought to Fort Comfort, Virginia were handed over as indentured servants. However, thereafter that, though, that was going to be the dawn of slavery. Or it said chattel slavery. I'm going to show you the individual who created chattel slavery. The individual who created chattel slavery was an African in America, creating an idea, a catalyst, a thought to subjugate individuals who were in the Americas under a system called slavery. See, slavery came out of the black mind. See, indentured servitude was a system, a caste system under the type of government called a monarchy. But this right here was about to happen to the individuals of dark skin hue in America, about to be something that's going to be atrocious. And it was all thought of, created in the minds of Negroes. That's why I'm telling you that Black history and African American history is not being told the right way. Once you start asking questions like, well, wait a minute, if they got brought from, who brought them from Africa? Oh, white people. What white people? Where were they from? How did they get a ship? How did they learn how to navigate? Who taught them to navigate the seas? What's their tribe? Where they come from? Once you start drilling down like a freaking 4-year-old asking questions, but why? But why? But why? But why? You just keep asking, but why? And just keep researching the but whys. And this is what I do. Anthony Johnson came off the motherfucking White Lion in 1619. 2 years later, he became, this is what it says. Let's keep reading. In 1621, he earned his freedom. He's an indentured servant. He earned his freedom in 1621 because it was only held under a 3-year indentured servitude. It was 7 years coming from Europe. Special condition, I reckon. I don't know. I'm speculating. Several years, 7, and was granted land by the colony. So in 1621, he earned his freedom. He later became a tobacco farmer in the province of Maryland. He attained great wealth after completing his term as an indentured servant. After completing his contract, Anthony Johnson completed the contract. And listen to what he's regarded as. He is referred to as the black patriarch, he's the father of the first community of Negro property owners in America. He is the patriarch of the first community of Negro property owners in America. He is the patriarch of the first community of African property owners in America. Anthony Johnson marks, and he's referred to as the Black patriarch of the first community of African property owners in America. This is Africans in American history. in the chat right now. I want you to put Africans in America. Africans in America. This is not African. These are African Americans, not even a real thing. These are Africans in America. And a lot of our people, sadly, have taken on the persona that this is their history. And it's not even their history. I don't even know if you guys realize what I'm telling you guys that are happening right now. I just showed you the USS White Lion, those 20 to 30 Angolans who were brought to Fort Comfort, Virginia. 2 years later, Anthony Johnson, who's from Angola, pop up as the patriarch of the first community of African property owners in America. The Kingdom of Ndungu. This is where he's from, Anthony Johnson. Now, watch this. Kingdom of Ndungu. Just watch me. Watch me work. Queen Nzinga. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Hold on. My bad. I did a, what you call? And then same territory where Anthony Johnson's coming from. Let's read on about him real quick. This is Queen Nzinga. She was the queen of the Kingdom of Ndungu. The same area that your boy is from. The same area where those 20 to 30 Africans come from. Now we got a location. Now we have a location. Where were those Africans from? Where were those Africans from? They were from the Kingdom of Ndungu, located in present-day Angola, because Angola, there was no Angola at this time. There was no Angola at this time. She was born into a ruling family of Ndungu. Her grandfather, Angola, whatever that name is, was the king of Ndungu, succeeded by her father. Nzinga received military and political training as a child, and she developed the aptitude for diffusing political crisis as an ambassador. As a child, she was an ambassador. I already knew it already. So what am I trying to show you? What I'm about to show you is Queen Nzinga, an African. The whole thing about the Atlantic slave trade and the way y'all feel towards white people, the Europeans, this is our people that are about to do this, man. This is us doing this. Now, I'm showing you Queen Nzinga. I'm going to show you the amount of Africans that she voluntarily gave over to the Portuguese because they were the ruling kingdom. So they just take over small little situations, villages, and take their ass to the shores and trade them, give them away. Watch how many she gave away. Now, the point again is this is just Anthony Johnson comes from this territory. Anthony Johnson's people from this territory was on the the slave ship White Lion. I keep saying USS because I was in prior Navy, so all American ships are called USS, which means United States ship. That's why I keep saying USS before ship. But the slave ship White Lion, or privateer ship White Lion, hijacks the San Juan Batista, which is also a cargo slave ship, and brought those 30 slaves to Hampton, Virginia. Those 30 slaves were from the Ndungu Kingdom. They were Angolans. The individuals in 1526 that the Spanish had, they were Angolans. Let's find out how many people was she shipping. First of all, the Portuguese declared war on her kingdom in 1626. And in 1628, her army had been severely depleted, and they went into exile. In search of allies, she married this guy right here who was a warlord. Using this new alliance to rebuild her forces, she conquered the kingdom of Matitaba from 1631 to 1635. In 1641, she entered an alliance with the Dutch West Indian Company. the Dutch West Indian Company, who had captured Luanda from the Portuguese between 1641 and 1644, and Nzinga was able to reclaim large parts of Ndongo alongside the Dutch. She defeated the Portuguese in a number of battles, but was unable to take the fortress of whatever this is right here. In 1648, the Portuguese recaptured Luanda, with the Dutch leaving Angola, and Nzinga continued to fight with the Portuguese until a peace treaty was signed in 1656. Crazy work. In centuries since her death, Nzinga has been increasingly recognized as a major historical figure in Angola and a wider Atlantic Creole culture. Atlantic Creole culture. Write that down, please. Atlantic Creole culture is an identifier of those with origins in the transatlantic settlement of the Americas via Europe and Africa. They descend from Europe and African ancestry, with many who were I don't know what that is. In 1500 and the 16th century, Atlantic Creole and their descendants are, I want to read on. Atlantic Creole and their descendants are multilingual Africans who develop synergetic culture in the Atlantic world. American historical Iberian Ari Berlin created the term Atlantic Creoles to define Africans who were transported across the Atlantic to a different continent region during the Atlantic slave trade and years of European colonization. So you're calling yourself African Americans and you're trying to say you're fucking a part of the Atlantic slave trade. That's not even what they're called. They're called Atlantic Creoles. Let's read it again. Let's read it. I'm not making this shit. Let's read it again. A man by the name of Ari Berlin created the term Atlantic Creoles to define Africans that were transported across the Atlantic to different continental regions during the Atlantic slave trade in the years of European colonization. Tell your mama, your pastor, your cousin, your sister, auntie, the African Americans is not a thing. I can show you Africans in America, but the people who were brought along the transatlantic slave trade, they're called Atlantic Creoles, according to Ari Berlin. It's a whole other term for the people. Atlantic Creoles. Look it up. Tell people that. Atlantic Creoles. Now, the history of Atlantic Creoles started in the 15th century, which is the 1400s. Starting in the 15th century, Europeans, mainly the Portuguese, began to settle regions around Africa and Nigeria and Angola. This is how we get the Batista bringing over the people from Angola. The Batista was a Portuguese Spanish ship. Soon, an early Atlantic Creole culture began to form, with cultural diffusion and admixing occurring. Some of these individuals would travel with Europeans to in explorations. We learned about one already. Remember the brother I showed you earlier who was calling him a Moor? We're going to see him again. Colonization and settlement of America in the late 15th century and the early 16th century, such as Juan Guarrido. This is a brother right here. Juan Guarrido was an Afro-Spaniard of Congo origin conquistador, known first documented as Bantu person in what would become United States, born in the Kingdom of Congo, West Central Africa. He went to Portugal as a young man and converted to Catholicism. I'm showing you, let me show him again. Hold on. I'm showing y'all as Africans in America. This is the history. Juan Guarrido, an African Spaniard of the Congo origin. He was a conquistador. Wait a minute. I thought conquistadors were from Portugal. I thought they looked like, no, these are the conquistadors right here. Not the light-skinned folks with the night face. No, the conquistadors, the conquerors. Africans in the America. It says was known as the first documented Bantu person in what would become the United States. He was already over here. This is the 16th century. This is the 1500s, y'all. This is 1575, 1526. Africans hauling other Africans over here. and killing off the indigenous population who's over here. We can learn all more about the Moorish Empire later, how vast it was. This is how they know where to go, what areas to hit. They weren't trying to get to Montana. They're trying to get to the hot spots where the gold was at. Anyway, Juan Garridos Juan Valentine was a African Spanish conquistador. He was another one. It says he was taken into captivity as a slave in Africa and was transported to Mexico, where he was venerated, I think it was. So there's two people right there, Juan Garrido and Juan Valentine. Later, when more European populations began to establish themselves in Africa, in the transatlantic industrial kidnapping complex, that's a word. It says the transatlantic industrial kidnapping complex. Let's highlight that real quick and see what this says. Let's hold on. Let's switch gears, family. Hold on. But we're seeing that a different side of the fucking story right now, right? And I haven't even got to the domestic slave trade, which took place in North America. I haven't even started talking about Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman yet. I want to show you the African presence in America during this time frame. And then if you choose to identify with it, then identify with it. You can still be African, I guess, but just know this shit ain't, but this is not how it went. This is the transatlantic industrial kidnapping complex. I want you guys to write that down. We're no longer going to call it the transatlantic slave trade because we know that's not what it is. We're no longer going to refer to this point in history as the transatlantic slave trade. We're now going to identify it as something different. I want you guys to call the transatlantic industrial kidnapping complex. It said it's not a formal historical term, but a descriptive phrase highlighting the systematic and industrial scale human trafficking and forced labor of transatlantic slave trade. The term captured the industrialized nature of the slave trade and the capitalist business models that drove it. The transatlantic slave trade as an industrial kidnapping complex. It was between 15th and 19th century. European and American traders forcibly abducted and trafficked millions of African people across the Atlantic Ocean. This was highly organized process involving a networking of trade companies, ports, and cities. Now, yeah, these were companies, y'all. These wasn't just, you had a couple privateers who were hijacking these shit, but this was a company, and that's why it says transatlantic industrial kidnapping complex, because it was an industry, meaning companies would participate in this. There was a Fortune 500 companies. One of those companies ran by King James. What was it called? I think it was called the African Trade Company. I might be wrong. I haven't did this in a while. Okay, it was called the Royal African Company. The Royal African Company, or RAC, was a British merchant company established in 1660 by King Charles II with a monopoly on the English trade of West Africa. This is the Royal African. Yeah, this is the Royal African Company right here. So these were companies. Okay, the Indian Tea Company, who entered into agreement with Queen Nzinga, we just read about just now. The Dutch Indian Tea Company, sorry. These are corporations doing this shit, family. Don't think for a second that these was just a clique of hillbillies in a rowboat off the coast of Africa snatching up Negroes. No, this was well orchestrated. This was a industrial complex, like the industrial prison complex. Same blueprint. Bondage, debt slaves, debtor's jail, life sentences, death penalties. This is maritime law being brought to the shores. These are all maritime operations. These are, watch this. You mean the same one that, yeah, James, yeah. Go back to all. Give me a second. The Royal African Company. It was called the Royal African Company. Was an English trading company. So this is a trading company established in 1660 by the House of Stuart. So the House of Stuart. We know the House of Stuart was House of Stuart, Tudor Stuarts, the Tudors. These were dark-skinned Europeans. Okay, olive tone Europeans. I don't want to get into the name. These were swarthy Europeans, the Stuarts. In fact, the House of Stuart, originally spelled Stuart from the word swarth, also known as the Stuart dynasty, was the royal house of Scotland, England, Ireland, and later Great Britain. The family name comes from the office of High Stewards of Scotland, as Queen Scotia them, which had been held by the family progenitor Walter Fitz-Alan. The Stuart restoration, and he granted it a monopoly on the English trade with Africa. While the company's original purpose was for gold in the Gambia River, as Prince Rupert of Ryan had identified gold deposits in the region during the interregnum, the RAC, or Royal African Trade Company, quickly began trading in slaves, who become its largest commodity. This became its largest commodity. Historians have estimated that the Royal African Company shipped more African slaves in America during the African trade than any other company. The RAC also dealt in other commodities such as ivory, preliminary source of the Gold Coast region. William III of England rescinded the company's monopoly in 1697 under the pressure of Parliament of England. The RAC became insolvent in 1708, though it survived in a state of much reduced activity to 1752, when its assets were transferred to the newly founded African Company of Merchants, which lasted 1821. So they just got a new LLC. This is the Royal African Company. See that anchor right here? Maritime operation. Private. So privateers probably work for them. You see that? Key people: James, King James, Charles and James. You may say, wait a minute, minister. I thought you said these were black people, Africans. We'll talk about that ball in his hand too. Globus Securus. Globus Secura. That was very powerful symbol right here. Very powerful. So this is Charles. Coat of arms. The Parliament of Scotland. Charles II was King of Scotland to 1649 to 1651. The King of England, Scotland, and Ireland from 1660 restoration of the monarch to his death in 1685. Charles was the eldest surviving child of Charles I of England. Charles I was exiled. This is the whole story. Charles I was exiled. I forgot the guy named Cromwell. I think his name's Cromwell, held it down for a while, and Charles II came back in power, and Charles made these 3 or 4 people called Lord Proprietors over South Carolina and North Carolina and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, this is Charles II. The point I'm making is that these are Africans doing this dirt to other Africans, trading them as slaves. These are companies. This was a black-owned company. House of Stewards were the dark-skinned folks of Europe. Okay? Charles II, little black boy. This is Charles II, the one we just saw. This says pubs around. You guys are seeing this shit, right? I'm not making this shit up. Charles II was black. Yeah, Carlos. Absolutely. Carlos. Absolutely. This is Charles II, the one with the Royal African Company I just showed you. Pubs across England called the Black Boy are generally named after King Charles II. It was the nickname coined by his mama. Get your little black ass over here. King Charles II mother called because of his dark skin and eyes. King Charles is credited with popularizing champagne drinking and yacht in England. Blah, blah, blah. Cromwell, yeah. Oliver, his name was Cromwell. And there's documents about King Charles being called the Black King. This says there was never a black king or queen of England. That claim is a myth. It says the term Black Prince refers to Edward of Woodstock. This says, look, and we got to get the information before AI start changing shit, man. You know what I'm saying? Because it says European lineage. The lineage of English monarchs can be traced back centuries to European roots with no evidence of any African heritage. This is what it says now. This is what it says. However, the Black Douglases of Europe. The Black Douglases, a dominant Scottish noble family of the 14th and 15th century, known for their military power and land holding, which extended throughout Scotland, even into Europe. Named for the good Sir James Douglas, a formidable warrior during the Scottish War of Independence, the family rose to prominence by serving the Scottish crown in conflict with England. Their influence peaked in the 15th century, but ended violently in 1450 when James II destroyed the clan and curbed their power. Sir James Douglas, known as the Black Douglas, was a loyal, fearsome commander to Robert the Bruce. His military prowess earned the family's wealth and land. Hold on, I got fire trucks going by. Hold on, family. All right, I'm right downtown. Let's know. The Black Douglas was known for their martial skills and became the most notorious warlords of medieval Scotland. The family's reputation. The Black Douglas became the powerful influence. The end of the Black Douglases. Following the Black Dinner, the king then moved to eliminate the remaining Douglas power, leading to a civil conflict, which the family was destroyed. The clan was utterly destroyed by 1455. These are the Black Douglases. The Anguses. You guys heard me and Crom talk about this before. Angus. So that's right. Oh, it's GG. My bad, y'all. Tripping. This says Gypsy. Hold on. The Black royal bloodline of Europe, Angus. It might have been Germany, though. I'm not sure. Yeah, here we go. Here we go. Historical evidence for Black royal bloodline. And see, this is what I'm saying earlier. We just saw AI tell us that there's no African ancestry, now blah, 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 blah. But see, when you start asking the right questions, you got to know how to navigate around this shit. Because reading that, there was no Black rule in Europe at all. Let's read on about this right here. The historical evidence for the Black royal bloodlines of Europe Angus is primarily linked to the Moors in the Iberian and complex, sometimes racially ambiguous nature of term Black in a medieval source. While there's no direct evidence of a royal bloodline for specific Scottish location of Angus, there are records of individuals of African descent in European aristocrat circles. The claim may be also referred to the historical misinterpretation of Afrocentric narratives that are disputed by mainstream historians. That's how they try to play it. Let's read on. The term black. And again, we're not losing our place on understanding that these Africans, these Black Europeans, whoever, had a hand in early Africans in American history. These Africans were everywhere. I'm showing you Africans right now in Europe in the same time frame, even before. The term black in medieval Europe and the term black or Moor was used ambiguously. It could refer to individuals of African descent, but also people with dark or swarthy complexity from the region of North Africa or Southern Europe. In Scotland, King Dub Mac Mel Colum in 962, also known as the Black, likely referring to his hair color. We know about Moors in Europe. Black nobility in Italy. The term black nobility has specifically a meaning unrelated to race, it says. This is AI is taking this shit all the way off. We know this is not even true. Examples of black and mixed race individuals in European nobility: Queen Charlotte, the wife of King Charles III. Queen Charlotte had Portuguese royal ancestry. Portuguese royal ancestry. Some historians and geneticists include Mario de Valudes have argued that she had African heritage through the 13th century ancestry, Margarita de Castro y Souza, though this is debated because they don't want that black blood in Europe, even though it's there. It's undeniable. The surname Angus is of Scottish origin. Some Afrocentric narratives have attempted to link Scottish hereditary symbols and other historical elements to the Moorish heritage. However, mainstream historians dispute such interpretation, noting that medieval sources often use color descriptions for a reason other than race. The connection of the English royal bloodline is not supported by documented historical evidence. In conclusion, there's no credible evidence, it says, of nobody black being in Europe. Then we go here, and this only deals with Spain and Portugal. That's just the Moors. And it continues to say that this wasn't a thing because we're using the wrong term. We're using the term black. We're trying to use the term black in a time that black was not applicable. The word hadn't even dropped yet. But the owner, watch this, was King James Swarthy. Not worthy. It's giving me somebody else. And what it does, it takes us back to the House of Stuart, when you first started. James became King James VI of Scotland at age 13 months in 1567. He was a steward. Steward is the same word as swarthy, which means black in Old English. Swarthy. King James was swarthy, Charles II was swarthy, and they both owned a trading company. That was the point, to show you the individual who owned this trading company right here. The Royal African Company. British monarchs, King Charles II and King James. Now, how did they get these bodies from Africa? Like who supplied the Africans to America? I'm about to round third base. We're gonna wrap it up. I'm I'm around third base. Remember, we was talking about Queen Nzinga, and we was talking about in the Ndingo Empire, etc., etc. Let's connect. Now you have black royal monarchs in Europe, James and Charles II, and this refers to what's known as the Royal African Company, which later becomes the African Company of Monarchs in 1752. They just switched the name up. They got a new LLC. In 1752, Parliament dissolved the Royal Act, but where did all the money go and all the assets? How many slaves did the Royal African Company transport between 1673 and 1688, which is about 15 years? The years of which the Royal African Company had monopoly on the English trading in Africa. The Royal African Company transported an estimated 90 to 100,000 enslaved persons on the average of 23 voyages a year. 23 voyages a year. This is the Royal African Company. Write this down, which was owned by King Charles, the black boy, little black boy Charles. He was successor after James with his little black tail. Swarthy self. Sorry, can't say black. Black wasn't the word back then. Swarthy. These little swarthy skinned Stuarts and Angluses, Stuarts, and Douglases. These Afro-European presence. The dark-skinned people doing business with dark-skinned people, and they're trading dark-skinned people. White people are not that smart. Y'all giving them away. Now later, these European monarchs and these European individuals going to peep game. Like, okay, mostly it was done by the barons, the Lombards in Europe at the time. We're learning about Lombards and barons some other time. I'm telling you, the Lombards and the barons has a huge financial persuasion on a lot of stuff that happens with American and European trade. So 90 to 100,000 Africans were shipped between 15 years on the Royal African Company transport ship owned by Black Boy Charles. This is a Black Boy Charles taking black people out of Africa. How many? Watch this. And we're going to go back to Ndungo. How many slaves did Queen Nzinga ship? Historical estimate indicated that Queen Nzinga sold nearly 200,000 enslaved people to the Portuguese. As a result of her military conflict during her reign, her involvement in slave trade is a complex and controversial aspect of her legacy. It doesn't matter. She did it. 200,000 enslaved people to the Portuguese. That's how the Portuguese began to bring bodies over here. So now you got the Portuguese bringing bodies over here. You got Black Boy Charles, them bringing what it said 30 to 90, 80 to 100,000. So that's about 500,000 right here of Africans who were shipped out of Africa on what's called the transatlantic slave trade. So we at least got 300,000 we can account for. 100,000 from the African Trading Company. There's other companies too now. Don't get it twisted. These are just two we're highlighting today. But those 200,000 Angolans who were brought over here were not being brought to North America. 20 to 30 of them were being brought to somewhere else, Mexico, right? 20 to 30 were being brought to Mexico. That was on the USS White Lion. USS White Lion. It wasn't USS. But the slave ship, the White Lion, which was a privateer ship that jacked the San Juan Batista. We're following. And I showed you, we're showing you earlier, before I got sidetracked, of those 20 to 30 Angolans who were brought over here, these 20 to 30 Angolans who were brought over here, that's what the movie Amistad is about, family. The movie Amistad is about the White Lion and the San Juan Batista being hijacked by the White Lion. Yeah, I know I keep saying USS. It's crazy, right? This is what the premise of the movie is about. Amistad. See, 12. I keep saying this. 12 Years a Slave was about the domestic slave trade. When he got off the ship, he was shipped from Washington D.C. Remember the movie 12 Years a Slave? He was kidnapped in Washington D.C. He went to go play the violin in D.C. and he woke up in New Orleans. That's the domestic slave trade, and they didn't go around the Atlantic Ocean. They went down the Mississippi River because there's ports all along the river. San Juan Batista and the White Lion, the movie Amistad. Now, we have Angola, we have Portuguese. We know that these individuals from Angola, such as Anthony Johnson, who's from the Kingdom of Angola, we know that he was a Portuguese Angolan. We know that the individuals that came off the White Lion to Hampton, Virginia, was from where? Angola. 2 years later, we now know that Anthony Johnson, who was the patriarch of the first African to put together a community in North America, of a group of Africans in America, wealthy landowners. Let's read it what it said. He later became a tobacco farmer of the province of Maryland. This is probably PG County. It's probably PG County because there's a lot of wealthy Negroes in PG County right now. He attained great wealth after completing his term as an indentured servant. His contract, remember the individuals that were let off of the ship in Hampton, Virginia were under contract as indentured servants, not enslaved. But this Negro is going to set the premise up for owning a person for life, which now gives you chattel slavery. That's why it said that pivotal moment in history became the catalyst for African American history or Black history because of what happened 2 years after that. Not the fact that they were bringing Negroes to the shores of Virginia. No, they've been bringing Negroes to the shores of North America, 1526, right? Remember that colony by the Spanish? So this has been happening. It's the fact that this Negro who was with them, what he's about to do. Anthony Johnson became the Black patriarch of the first community of African property owners in America. In the 1620s, African slave traders kidnapped the man who would later became known as Anthony Johnson, the Portuguese Angolan, and sold him to Portuguese slavers. And the name Antonio was given to him in the Atlantic slave trade. A colonist in Virginia acquired Antonio as an indentured servant. Antonio worked as a merchant at the Virginia Company, another company. Now, the Virginia Company was chartered by King James I. It seemed like a conflict of interest if you're going to, now remember this symbol. Now, the other symbol has two Africans in the, it's the royal sign, symbol, shield. Imagine owning a colony and then owning the company that supplies your colony with bodies. Crazy word. King James, crazy word. He also received into Roman Catholic Church. He's a Catholic now. He sailed in Virginia aboard the James. The Virginia muster census of 1624 listed his name as Antonio, not given record. Oh, it's not recorded as Negro in the note column. It's not given, recorded as a Negro in the notes column. Historians dispute whether his name was Antonio or later became Anthony. The census lists several names Antonio. This is considered most likely. Johnson was sold as an indentured servant to the merchant Edward Bennett to work on his Virginia tobacco farm, Warsquake, on the south bank of the James River. Slave laws were not passed until 1661 in Virginia. Before that date, Africans were not officially considered to be enslaved. When did slavery start? 1619? No, it did not. No, it did not, because in 1661, there were no laws until 1661. Sorry. Nobody was a slave in 1619. Nobody. It was contractual indentured servitude work for hire. Y'all see that? There were no laws to outline this idea of what you have in your head with slavery. It didn't even exist in the early colonial time, at this time. Such workers typically work under limited indentured contracts. Such workers worked under limited indentured contracts. I've been telling y'all that. These are contracts. Kanye said slavery was a choice. It was. You could enter into contract to do this work if you wanted to. You could choose not to. For 4 to 7 years. And your contract is up. After that, they give you land. This was not called the Homestead Act. This was called Heads' Rights. This is called Heads' Rights. This is the earlier version of the Homestead Act. See that? In the early colonies, most Africans in the 13 colonies were held under search contracts of limited indentured servitude, except for those indentured for life. They were released after a contract period. Those who managed to survive their period of indenture would receive land and equipment. This is the contract Anthony Johnson got. He got a contract. Antonio almost died in the Indian massacre of 1622. Blah, blah, blah. Rah, rah, rah. So now, oh crap. I got to run, family. I apologize. I went over my time. I got to hop on with the call. Hey, man, listen, we'll pick back up on this a little bit later. Thank y'all for tapping in. I hate to leave in such a haste, but I got to handle business real quick. Thank y'all so much, family. Be sure to share this shit, man. And I'll tap back in with y'all soon. Peace and love. Share this shit, man. Share it. It was getting good and juicy, too. I'll pick back up later today, though, man. Thank y'all for tapping in.